Curioso, and welcome back to the Welsh History Podcast, episode 236, Science, Invention, Innovation in Wales. Now, we've talked in the past about different aspects of Welsh history, of its cultural advancement, of various things that have come about due to industrial advancement, but here's a different topic and angle I want to take today. With the arrival of the Enlightenment in the 17th century, Britain began a long process to learn about the world around them. It was something that had seen a great deal of change in the way fundamentally we understood our world. In the past, science was still very much in its infancy, and it's here where it starts to pick up in great leaps and bounds. And a lot of the tools that we use today find their origin points pretty quickly after this. The establishment of the Royal Society, which was founded in London in 1660, became the initial warehouse in which scientific thought was developed, expanded, and grew even further, at least within the British Empire. It was soon joined by other groups and societies which were slowly advancing and growing in the capital city of the British Empire. This meant that there was a lot of different time and talent being used to develop and create a number of different things. Included in that, of course, was those Welsh societies that we've discussed before, who helped develop the language, the culture, and the writing, and even music that affects people to this day. It is in those meetings that much of the modern Welsh culture and thought began and grew. As we move into the 19th century, invention and science and philosophy obviously continues to grow and expand at a very rapid rate. In the face of industrial change, new power dynamics, and a general desire for more educated people who they themselves were becoming more curious about the world around them, helped to develop even more this idea of growing desires to understand and come to grips with the world. There were people that were actively going out to examine the world around them, to come to grips with what made up the world, and changing a lot of the basic standards of what we originally thought the world and the universe was like, and develop it into much more the perceptions we have today. We owe quite a great deal to these initial people who take these opinions and develop them and move on from them, and then use other people's inventions to develop their own methods and inventions and processes that, again, we're going to talk about in further detail. In this episode specifically, we're going to talk about a few of the thought leaders, the inventors, and the scientists who helped this process in Wales. And while we will talk about these people, these are certainly not the only. This is just a taste of all of the people who, over time, helped change the world around them. The very first person I want to mention is Richard Trevithick. Was born on April 13th, 1771 in Illigan, Cornwall. Richard grew up surrounded by steam engines. Obviously, this is the age of steam as it's begun. His father worked as a mining captain, and so Trevithick was not a stranger to the world of mining and steam-powered engines, which were used to pump water out of mines. In fact, we've talked a little bit about the use of that. But while those engines were functional, they were stationary. They weren't designed to move. Richard, however, had a different vision, one that would eventually lead to the development of the first ever steam-powered locomotive. Now, this idea wasn't exactly revolutionary. People had been using steam engines in some form for years at this point, but Trevithick's idea would change everything to do with that. While most of the engines at the time were low-pressure engines, which were bulky and inefficient, Trevithick believed that he could create a high-pressure steam engine that would make it smaller and more powerful, and more importantly, mobile. In 1801, Trevithick succeeded in this quest. He created a high-pressure steam engine which was more compact and powerful than anything which had come before it, But his ambitions didn't stop there, as he didn't want to just build stationary engines. He wanted to use this steam power for transportation. Fast forward to 1804, and Trevithick's big moment arrived. He designed a steam-powered locomotive known as Penydarren locomotive. This was the first steam locomotive to pull a train along a track, and it was a monumental achievement for the time period. On February 21st, 1804, the Penydarren locomotive successfully pulled a 10-ton train carrying passengers and freight for a distance of about 9 miles in South Wales. Imagine, of course, at that period being one of these passengers experiencing for the first time a method of moving that had nothing to do with sails or horses. This was in fact the first time in history that steam power was used to move people and goods over a sustained distance, and it was, of course, revolutionary. But despite the success of the Penydarren locomotive, Trevithick's work didn't have the immediate impact he had hoped for. The locomotive, while groundbreaking, wasn't perfect. It had a lot of difficulty in operating it, and the steam engine's high pressure made it prone to accidents. Many people, for example, were scared of the steam engines, and the idea of traveling by a steam-powered train seemed risky to these people. As a result, Trevithick's work didn't immediately change the world of transportation in the way one might think would have happened. However, that didn't stop him. Trevithick was a dreamer first and foremost, and unfortunately for him, a bit too trusting. He would be swindled by a partner, which caused the failure of his London business, which he had started in 1808 for the manufacture of a type of iron tank that he had patented. Following soon after that was a bankruptcy in 1811. Yet he continued to try to find some forms of success. In 1814, 9 of Trevithick's engines were ordered for the Peruvian silver mines, and dreaming of unlimited mineral wealth in the Andes Mountains, he sailed to South America in 1816, like many before him, seeking riches that he thought were just within his grasp. Keep in mind that the early 1800s, there was a lot of thought process in South and Central America that gold and silver, and even in North America, that gold and silver could be found fairly easily if you had the right location or the right way to find it. And there was a lot of talk about secret caves of gold and jewels and silver just waiting around the next bend. And of course, largely failing to do that. And of course, he was certainly never the only one. After a lot of tribulation, he would end up returning to England 11 years later in 1827. By this time, he was penniless, and to find that during his absence, other engineers had profited from his invention, and he died in poverty and was buried in an unmarked grave. But that doesn't mean that his work wasn't incredibly important. In fact, it laid the groundwork for future inventors. After the Penydarren locomotives, Trevithick continued experimenting with steam-powered vehicles, including trying his hand at a steam-powered road vehicle and steam-powered ships. His Catch Me Who Can locomotive, built in 1808, was another attempt to improve on his design, although it too was not a commercial success. It wasn't until George Stephenson came along in the 1820s that steam locomotives began to gain traction. But it was important to remember that Stephenson's success was built on the work of pioneers like Trevithick, as his ideas and his high-pressure engines and his vision for steam-powered transportation were essential to the development of the railway system that we rely on today. And the fact that the very first one of his engines ran in Wales as sort of side Welsh, as you could describe it, still has significance. It's still amazingly important in the development of locomotives and in the development of steam power. Next on the list is Sir William Robert Grove. It's maybe a name you're not as familiar with, but Grove's contributions were incredibly forward-thinking. In fact, his invention of a fuel cell in the mid-1800s is one of the key innovations that continues to shape energy science even today. Born in 1811 in Swansea, Wales, William Robert Grove was a man of many talents. Educated at Brasenose College, Oxford, he initially pursued law, becoming a barrister in 1835, but law was just a part of his story. His true passion laid in science. During a time when Victorian Britain was experiencing rapid advancements in industry and technology, Grove became fascinated with chemistry and electricity. His scientific curiosity would lead to the discoveries that changed the course of energy science. One of Grove's most significant achievements came in 1839 when he invented the gas voltaic battery, now known as the fuel cell. This device converts chemical energy directly into electricity through a reaction between hydrogen and oxygen without combustion. As Grove himself said, it seems probable that at no very distant period, voltaic electricity may become a useful means of locomotion. The arrangement of batteries so as to produce the greatest power in the smallest spaces becomes important. End quote. While the world wasn't quite ready to harness its full potential at the time, Grove's pioneering work laid the foundation for future energy solutions. His invention would eventually inspire modern hydrogen fuel cells, which are now used in everything from spacecraft to clean energy vehicles. Grove's contributions did not stop at energy. He was a key figure in early photography, making advancements in electrochemistry and even predicting conservation of energy principles before it was widely accepted. Later in life, he returned to law, becoming a highly respected judge and eventually a justice on the Queen's Bench. Despite his incredible contributions to both science and law, his name is often overlooked in the history books. Fuel cell technology he pioneered is now a critical part of our transition towards sustainable energy. Scientists and engineers worldwide are building upon his discoveries to develop cleaner and more efficient energy sources. Swansea University even honored his contributions by naming a building after him, his legacy serving as a reminder that innovation often starts with a curious mind and a willingness to challenge the status quo. Next, born in 1834 in Carnarvon, is William Henry Preece, a man driven by curiosity and a passion for innovation. He studied at King's College London and quickly made a name for himself as an engineer. During the Victorian era, when communication technology was transforming the world, Preece emerged as a key figure in the expansion and modernization of Britain's telegraphic network. His work as an electrical engineer and later as chief engineer of the British Post Office placed him at the center of the telecommunications revolution. One of Preece's biggest contributions was his role in improving Britain's telegraph system. Under his leadership, telegraphy became faster, more efficient, and more reliable. He introduced underground cables and experiments with new ways of sending signals over long distances. His innovation helped lay the groundwork for a global communications network that we rely on today. But perhaps his most exciting contribution came in the field of wireless telegraphy. Before Guglielmo Marconi made his famous wireless transmission, Preece has already been experimenting with wireless communication. In the 1890s, he demonstrated a form of inducted wireless telegraphy, proving that messages could be transmitted without physical wires. He even showed how signals could be sent across the water, something that would later become crucial in naval and maritime communication. Though Marconi would eventually refine and commercialize radio technology, Preece was one of the first to see its potential and advocate for his use. In fact, Preece was an early advocate for the telephone and tried to make demonstrations of it to the Royal Society. In one particular case, he set up this idea of a telephone where one was set up at a great distance away with a bugler at the other end, and then he was set up with his telephone. And the idea was that the bugler was supposed to play a song, and the listener at the other end was supposed to be able to tell. But the problem was he handed it to Alfred Lord Tennyson, who promptly didn't hear anything and complained. And so Priest took the telephone from him and put his ear up to it and then claimed he heard a particular song being played by the bugler. The fact was is that it actually didn't work. But the reason why it didn't work wasn't because it couldn't work, but rather the bugler had got his days mixed up and hadn't shown up to actually play. So with a little bit of scheming, he showed that it worked without necessarily having the person there to actually represent it working. Priest's contributions would eventually extend beyond communications. He was a passionate advocate for electrification, supporting the use of electric lighting and public transportation. His influence helped shape British transition to electrical powered society. Knighted in 1899 for his service in engineering, he remained an active voice for scientific circles until he died in 1913. Though his name isn't as well known today as some of his contemporaries, it definitely laid the foundation for some of the largest developments in the history of mankind. Last person I wanted to speak about today is Teresa Dilthwyn Llewellyn. Born in 1834 in Penlllegar, Wales, Teresa grew up in an environment that nurtured her curiosity. She was the daughter of John Dilthwyn Llewellyn, a scientist and photographer who played a key role in early photography. Encouraged by her father's work, Teresa developed a passion for both science and the arts, blending them into groundbreaking discoveries in astronomy and photographic techniques. In an era when women were often excluded from scientific fields, she defied expectations and made significant contributions to the study of the night sky. Teresa was given a camera for her 22nd birthday from her father. She said after she received it, quote, "I saw Papa make 2 stereoscopes. With the new stereoscope camera that he gave me for my birthday present, I intended to work hard with it so as to get some picture worthy of it." End quote. Photography was still in its infancy in the mid-19th century, but the family was at the forefront of experimentation. Working alongside her father, Teresa developed a new technique in early photographic processes. One of her most remarkable achievements was capturing a detailed image of the moon using the family's private observatory. These lunar photographs were among the first of their kind, bridging the gap between science and photography. At a time when astronomers relied heavily on sketches, Teresa's work helped demonstrate the potential of photography in scientific research. Teresa's achievements were even more remarkable given the societal constraints placed upon women in science during this century. Though she was deeply involved in her father's scientific endeavors, her contributions were often overlooked in a field which was dominated by men. Nevertheless, she continued to push boundaries and, corresponding with other scientists, conducted her own research, proving that women had a place in scientific exploration. While her name may not be as well known as other pioneers in astronomy or photography, her contributions were undeniably significant. Her work helped pave the way for modern astrophotography, a field which has since become essential for our understanding of the universe. One only has to think of the James Webb Telescope as an example of this. Today, we celebrate her as one of the early figures who saw the potential of merging science with technology to unlock the mysteries of space. Her story serves as an inspiration for future generations of women in science, reminding us that innovation often comes from those willing to challenge convention. These, of course, are just a few of the people that we're talking about. And like I said earlier, it's only a small sampling of everything that we could discuss and probably will discuss over time of people who had significant influence on how the world was shaped at this time of massive expansion. You have to understand that largely the world had not changed a great deal from about, I would argue, 1100 until about 1600s. Pretty much the experience of someone in those periods of time would not have changed from the day to day. Sure, there were wars, there were famines, there were all sorts of changes from a religious standpoint. But when you talk about your day to day life, a serf in the 1100s and a poor person in the 1600s probably had a lot in common. If anything, the only difference might have been a slight increase in urbanization. But if you look at how quickly things start to change from the 17th century onward, as more and more people are becoming involved in and educated in the world around them, they are starting to understand things in a way that helps to advance things. We go from having a horse and a buggy and maybe some tools to do certain things to suddenly being able to create vehicles that do not rely on any sort of natural wind or motion from an animal to actually move them. We slowly start to innovate how we are creating and developing all sorts of different things. But as we start to roll with all of these, you start with, the cotton ginny and trying to create steam power to help with, that sort of development. All of a sudden, next thing you know, you're talking locomotives and steam trains, and those then become automobiles, which then become planes, which, develop into massive changes in wireless communication and being able to speak distances across the world, to recording your voice on a record, which you can then send to people talking to us from the early 1900s or even earlier than that. And we can listen to them and understand how these people sounded and how they live their own personal lives. And then, of course, we get into video production and televisions and movies and all of these things. All of this explodes out of this era of rapid development and innovation. And it isn't because somebody was trying to hold anybody back, but rather it's happening because more and more people are being educated and more people are going higher in education. And as people become more and more curious and understand the world around them, the more and more they're developing different ways of dealing with things. Photography, which starts off very rudimentary, becomes very complex in a very short period of time. By the US Civil War, for example, photography in the war is being used to capture a lot of what's going on in ways that even 30 years earlier just could not have been done. And by the time we get to the beginning of the 1900s, you have motion pictures, which are capturing World War One, and you start to see a whole different aspect of how people are acting, moving, and thinking. And then shortly thereafter, within 20 years of that, we have motion pictures with voice and action and color. And it kind of becomes difficult looking back at it now to realize just how rapid that was. Not rapid if we think about it from this point forward, but if you think about it from the prior time period to now, the rapidity of what's happening is so massive. It creates a backlash of people who are scared of it, scared of the consequences of this new technology, scared of what it might mean for them, for their families. And you see a backlash against it. Something that still happens to this day when new technologies are discussed. There is a sense of fear about what these new technologies will do. Will they be a benefit? Will they be a hindrance? Will they create positives or negatives? And even when people think that they will do nothing but create positives, there's always a way to make a negative out of it. Like, just think of the internet. Started out with a lot of positivity, a lot of thought about, wow, now we can talk to people across the world instantaneously. We can have conversations with each other. Then we find out that we don't all agree, and wahoo. Uh, but all of that is very rapid and it's developing very quickly. And many people have a part in it. And like I said, these are just 4 people who have had a great influence on the world, but they are just a small sampling of people who will come and continue to have an influence on the world around them, some for good, some for ill, and all of which will change the world in ways that nobody expected and nobody could have thought was going to happen. I want to thank you all for listening and viewing today. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can always reach me at the Welsh History Podcast at gmail.com, or you can reach out to me at any of my social media sites at Welsh History Pod, or on Facebook as The Outlier at facebook.com/Welsh History. Love to hear from you. Thank you so much, and have yourselves a wonderful rest of your day. Take care. Bye-bye. Welsh History Podcast is a member of the Evergreen Podcast Network. To find more information on them, you can do so at evergreenpodcasts.com. Thanks for listening.